On this episode of Greater Than 0%, we hear from Ward Miller, Executive Director of Preservation Chicago, about the work that they're doing to protect and revitalize Chicago's irreplaceable architectures. This one is longer than our typical one, but be ready to be informed and educated on the history of architecture in Chicago and everything that goes into it. Thanks again for tuning in. Thanks, folks, for tuning into this episode. Today, we have Ward Miller, who is the Executive Director and one of the original co-founders of Preservation Chicago, of course, another nonprofit in the Chicago area. Ward, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Yes, thank you for having us, Joseph.
Yes, of course. So, per usual, 30, 60-second elevator pitch. What is Preservation Chicago?
So Preservation Chicago is a Chicago-based advocacy organization dedicated to the built environment, to protecting our city art legacy of its architecture, its legacy, its landmarks, promoting landmarks, and working with neighborhoods to grow communities in a very holistic way, a very sensitive way, to preserve envelopes, if you will, the buildings that contain all sorts of wonderful things that happen with inside of them. And we work across the city. We've been involved in Altgeld Gardens, which was a housing project for African-American servicemen, to Lathrop Homes on the Northwest Side, to protecting Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley's home and getting that landmark in the last few months. So we work across the city to sort of preserve that look, feel, and spirit of our city. And we're also there at every Commission on Chicago Landmarks and Permit Review Committee meeting of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks to encourage more landmark buildings and to encourage their preservation and restoration eventually.
Yeah. All right. I'm born and raised in Chicago. So Chicago is very dear to me. So when when I stumbled upon this organization, I thought that this was amazing because it's with hypergrowth, I think sometimes some very historical locations in our city could get plowed through. So really excited to get into what we're going to talk about. Thanks for that background. So Executive Director, organization's been around since 2001. You've been an executive director for 7 years, but you're one of the original co-founders. So what made you see the need or want to be part of the original crew for this?
So, well, thank you. And a good question. So just so you know, born and raised in Chicago, I'm really fourth generation in the city. My maternal great-grandmother and great-grandparents came here in the 1890s. We're married at actually St. Michael the Archangel Church at 83rd and South Shore Drive. And so long associations with a lot of different neighborhoods in Chicago. I started off on the south side to be close to one grandparent, ended up moving to the northwest side to be next to a paternal grandparent to take care of me. And at 5 years old, we moved downtown to the Irving Apartments designed by Pond and Pond, which a few years later were impacted by a demolition. The Newberry Library owned it. It was one of the first early Newberry Library structures. And then I was enrolled at Bateman School, an old Patterson McCormick mansion at Burton and Astor. And it was threatened later on with demolition. And then my parents decided to split. So mom stayed downtown, dad moved to Lakeview and then to Hyde Park. So I saw a lot at a very early age. And I was also witnessing the changes in these neighborhoods, urban renewal efforts, wholesale land clearance, people being displaced, businesses being displaced, and also, the 1968 riots. I was 7 years old when Dr. King was assassinated. And I saw so much happening. My mother was teaching at Crane High School on the west side, crawled down a couple flights of stairs on her belly. She and the principals were interrogated in the auditorium. And she eventually became a child psychologist and worked with people with all sorts of disabilities. And So I grew up in the thick of it all. My first jobs, even as a young man, were in the Loop. My dad worked in the Loop, and I was a patron of all the department stores and whatnot. So our early history in Chicago, getting to know the city, almost a part of me, and then. Going to architecture school at IIT on the South Side, actually going to Whitney Young. I was the first class out of Whitney Young High School.
Wow.
There's this gal named Michelle Robinson Obama, 2 years behind me. She wasn't an Obama at the time. It was just Michelle Robinson. And really a diverse school that was brand new. And I was the first class, and it was a very small school, which grew as we ascended through the years. Then to Northwestern and IIT, where I studied architecture, the Illinois Institute of Technology. Studied architecture in Crown Hall, Mises one-room schoolhouse, essentially, although, it's a beautiful and perfect glass box. And learned to really understand and love, as I had from an early age, Chicago's architecture. And I think watching and seeing so much demolition really funneled me this way. So I went to work for John Vinci, in Office of John Vinci, later Vinci Hamp Architects, only to find out John Vinci had remodeled my dad's house under a larger firm's name. It was Dan Brenner. So you can see all these circles coming together here. Working for John for 20 years on a lot of restorations, Frank Lloyd Wright houses, Louis Sullivan buildings, art installations at the Art Institute, whole temporary shows like Monet and Degas and a whole host of them. And really and Holy Family Church and restoration and preservation of buildings. And restoration and preservation have always been a side interest, or really a primary interest to me, and worked with Landmarks Illinois and have been part of their issues committee for 25 years. But they're a statewide organization. We really felt there needed to be more dedication to Chicago. So after 20 years of working in an architectural office, John Vinci offered me the dream job of completing a book I'd wanted to see out since I was 12 years old, called The Complete Architecture of Adler and Sullivan. Wow. It was Richard Dickel and Aaron Siskin's photographs and work and research on all the buildings of Adler and Sullivan, including the auditorium building with the Auditorium Theater, the Garrick Schiller building, the Stock Exchange, the Chicago Stock Exchange, which you see fragments in many museums, and also the Carson Perry Scott store, among 250 others. And we were able to put this book together over 7 years. It started in the 50s, 10 years before I was born. Wow. And it's an 8.5 pound book. And if you'd like, I could even pull it off the shelf for you. It's the bestseller. It sells between $500 to $1,000 now. We underwrote the cost of it. And after that project, I came to Preservation Chicago, which was founded by a really dedicated group of people. It was led by Jonathan Fine and Michael Moran as president and vice president. And after we got our nonprofit status, Jonathan became our first executive director. And then I became the second executive director after serving as president for a couple of years as well. And so this has come home to roost. And this is a passion. It's more than a job. And it's a wonderful job helping people and using historic buildings in the built landscape in our landmarks and our future landmarks together to really build a more positive city, and in a city that's known for its architectural legacy, which prior to the preservation movement and the loss of some of these great seminal buildings was something that was limited knowledge to architects, architectural historians, architecture scholars. But we've done such a good job with organizations like Chicago Architecture Center and outreach programs and our advocacy groups and podcasts like this that word's gotten out that we are a city to visit for architecture. And we have this amazing volume of buildings, from balloon frame construction, which was invented here, wood frame, to the steel skeleton, the Chicago School of Architecture, to the Prairie School and Frank Lloyd Wright. So Louis Sullivan, Daniel Burnham, John Root, Hollerberg and Roche, and the list goes on to Frank Lloyd Wright and to Bertrand Goldberg, people like him, Walter Netsch. and of course, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, and the sort of second international or Bauhaus school in Chicago.
Wow. Yes,
I
second
like
that.
In a nutshell.
Yes. There's a lot of, like you said, it's almost like full circle. You have a lot of roots in a lot of these. And I think, I don't remember what article claimed this, but I heard that the Chicago architecture tour, the boat tour, is like one of the most popular tourist attractions like in the nation.
It's
so
wonderful, isn't it?
There has to be a reason, right?
Right. And the Chicago Architecture Center, formerly Chicago Architecture Foundation, which was founded to protect Glessner House, an HH Richardson building, I didn't mention HH Richardson, forgive me. And there are others, of course, that are all top tier Chicago people and Chicago designers, artists, and architects, and engineers all in one. We find that wonderful that because when I was a little boy growing up in Chicago, you didn't really hear so much about these legacy firms. And the buildings of Louis Sullivan and Dankmar Adler were wonderful, but remember the Auditorium Theater was shuttered for decades and then restored in 1967, and that was considered really a magical turning event, as well as the demolition and the protesting of the demolition of the Garrick Schiller building, and of course the Stock Exchange 10 years later in 1971. But this really did start a movement in America, along with the demolition and loss of Pennsylvania Station or Penn Station in New York City. Really opened that conversation up to what is important to save, and this architectural legacy. And I think of these buildings as works of art, Joseph, and I oftentimes compare them to a great painting at the Art Institute or a great sculpture you might see at the Louvre, and they're nothing less than that. And they're buildings that we live and exist in, and are part of our environment. So we oftentimes look to protect whole districts of buildings with a landmark district designation, which it's not meant to freeze a building in time, like make it a museum piece. It's meant to be a living landmark, but to preserve the look, feel, and the spirit of a neighborhood as you walk down the street. So it's really a rewarding position, especially when you have successes. And when you have successes, I think most everybody celebrates. And this is something for the ages. It's not about me personally. It's not about our organization personally. It's about sort of almost a public service. But of course, we're a nonprofit organization. Everything we do is pro bono. And we're supported by great foundations and individuals that like what we do and make it accessible to everyone.
And when you say a win, do you mean like when you successfully prevent a demolition of a historic building?
Yeah, so oftentimes it results in a landmark designation, but not always. And we work with developers, a slew of developers that are preservation sensitive, and we oftentimes encourage them as good stewards to take on troubled buildings. Is my line, and they oftentimes incorporate these structures into new buildings, or they repurpose them. And, really an investment in these buildings is really important. Otherwise, they fade away. And so ironically, we're pro-development in a funny way, but we're pro-sensitive development.
Right.
Where we keep historic resources. And then I think another thing to remember is we're not out to save every old building. We're out to save the good ones and groups of them. And we have something called the Chicago Historic Resources Survey in Chicago. It was started in the 1980s and published in 1996, which is almost 25 years ago. And they have a color coding, red being the highest priority. Those are, the buildings of international fame, and then orange being below that. So, the international fame would be the Auditorium, the Carson Store, the Rookery, the Reliance Building, the Marshall Field Store, and the list, Roby House, the list goes on, right? And the orange category is also really important. That's like the Palmer House, a lot of your neighborhood churches and synagogues, and really fine quality homes and buildings. And both of those categories could be almost considered for landmark designation, along with the greens and the yellows, which are part of another category of buildings. But the oranges, or the reds and the oranges, are the highest category. We would like to see, more of those preserved. But there's also an effort to update the survey, and it's coming from the general public as a groundswell of support, encouraging the city to do this. We also want to see organizations like Place Economics come in and really value from the outside, if you will, an outside organization, the value of landmarks. Does this slow gentrification? Does it encourage gentrification? Is it really more expensive to live in a landmark district? Maybe it's not. Pullman, the town of Pullman on Chicago's South Side, now part of the city of Chicago, but the first planned factory town community with an amazing civil rights and labor history, has been a landmark since the 1970s. And, you certainly don't see vast gentrification going on there. And that's true also in Austin, in the Austin Shock District. Now, there are areas like, Old Town and Lincoln Park, which is, like 3 to 4 landmark districts placed together. But remember, when Old Town was landmarked in the 1970s, it was just an affordable neighborhood. And it's really just the land values in Chicago that sometimes drive up these prices. And of course, everybody loves the look and feel and the charm of these neighborhoods. So it does bring more people and more interest. So anyway, that's where we are. It's complicated, but it's wonderful. And even when we can't get a landmark district or a landmark designation, there are other tools. Cities introducing the idea of conservation districts, which will preserve volumes of buildings, but maybe not protect them from demolition. But at least, if you had a street of bungalows and you tear one down, you build something essentially equivalent to the same size and proportions and volume of that bungalow that you took down. So all these things, along with downzoning, can actually help. And these are all planning tools to grow a more healthy city. And that was not invented by us at Preservation Chicago, but we certainly do encourage their use.
Yes.
Often.
I didn't know that neighborhoods could be designated as, you said, landmarks. I thought it was just usually a building that could be designated. So you're saying like Lincoln Park, for example, is designated as a landmark neighborhood?
Well, parts of these neighborhoods are designated. So Lincoln Park, the broader Lincoln Park community, which would include Old Town by our standards now, because, it's just like downtown Chicago keeps growing in every direction. And, it used to have boundaries that were pretty close by, but now they keep growing north, south, and west, right? And you see that most in the West Loop, which is, so does, the loop go all the way to Ashland Avenue now, and south to 26th Street and north to Oak Street or Division, actually, or maybe North Avenue, right? Where it used to have these boundaries, which were Roosevelt, Halsted, not even Halsted, even further east, because, you had Skid Row west of Halsted, which is, now the West Loop, and it's one of the hottest real estate markets. But anyway, these landmark districts are usually a group of buildings. So let's say in an area like Lincoln Park, you would have the Old Town Triangle District, and separate from that, the Mid-North District, and separate from that, but sometimes abutting, you would have the Arlington-Deming District, and there are other little strips, the Roslyn District. And so, and sometimes they're smaller and sometimes they're larger. There was a proposed district in Pilsen that you may have heard of that would have been by far the largest at 900 plus buildings. I live in Logan Square, where we were able to get 2.25 miles of the boulevard system, 330 buildings landmarked. And that's probably more in the range of your bigger districts. But we have a new district, which is a preliminary district at Armitage and Halsted of 4 buildings. So you can see that it goes from the very modest and individual landmarks to, hundreds of buildings.
And what's in it for preserving a building? Like, I think that's a good question. Like, if I want to build, Yes. Yeah. Like what are some of the perks usually? Yeah.
So, well, first of all, and I think this should not be undermined or underscored, is it's a great honor to be a designated Chicago landmark. There are 7 criteria, and 2 of those criteria need to be met to be a landmark, plus the integrity criteria. So if you have a beautiful wood frame 1850s house, for instance, that has metal siding on it or asphalt siding, we may have a problem here with integrity, and that's the integrity criteria. But so first is the great honor, and with that comes, a landmarks report, which is a printed report talking about the history of the building, the neighborhood, the community, the people that built it, perhaps. And that is a document that goes online and is accessible, on the web, which is really important. There's also a permit fee waiver. So if you're doing construction work or restoring your house, that building permit fee is waived. And then also there's something called Adopt a Landmark. So if you're an individual landmark or part of a district, let's say you're a big building in a district, there's a developer funded fund, which is a grant, and it's competitive, but they're given out several times a year. And this is a grant that could be given to help restore your building. Most often they're in the range of $250,000, so $250,000. If you're a project like the Uptown Theater, which hasn't unfortunately gotten off the ground yet, they dedicated a $3 million grant to them. But keep in mind that these are usually for larger buildings or individual landmarks, not necessarily for individual homeowners, but there could be exceptions looking to the future. And it's not from the city general fund; it's from this developer fund, which neighborhood opportunity funds, as well as Adopt a Landmarks funds, come from. And that's a decision that's made by the city. It used to be there used to be different rules where the development had to be close to the landmark, 2,000 feet away, but that's changed now. Thanks in part to our input and we help wherever we can, the city and neighborhood residents, and we outreach quite a bit, and we're very proud of that. And I think we do it in a very sensitive, heartfelt way. And our primary mission is, protecting historic buildings in the city of Chicago. We don't go into the suburbs. It's just the city limits. But a lot of what we do protects a lot of wonderful things to occur, and you especially see that in our work with housing projects in the Chicago Housing Authority, even Rosenwald Gardens, Rosenwald Apartments on the south side, where after many years of being empty, our organization, along with Landmarks Illinois and several other organizations, were able to finally encourage the buildings to be restored and the process landmarked. And the same is true with the old Main Post Office, where we were advocating that the entire building be saved. People were saying it was too big a building, we're going to have to demolish the center section. And I would come to these meetings and say, why would anyone in the Loop or in the downtown area say their building's too big? Would you say the Sears Tower is too large? Like, why would you demolish anything? Come on, let's wait. So, fortunately, somebody held on to it, and it didn't do a lot to it, but stable, kept it stable and safe. And finally, it became the place to be now. And Walgreens is headquartered there. Ferrara Pan, Uber's got, a regional headquarters and others. And then Cook County Hospital was another one with Landmarks Illinois. We saved, and we got Studs Terkel out there back in the day before the county closed it with placards that said protect Cook County Hospital. But we lose a few too, like the Main Post, like Prentice Hospital, part of Northwestern by Bertrand Goldberg. It was a clover-like cylinder, cloverleaf shaped building by the same architect who did Marina City. And, and we lost the Town and Tennis Club, Unity Church, to Misericordia, who wanted to build a group of homes for their most needy there. So we wanted to move it. We wanted to move it to the adjacent park so it could be a park building. And So I think you can see that maybe in our conversation that we really try to do a lot of good that goes beyond just historic preservation and landmarking. We really want to work with communities to identify new landmark districts, to identify character districts, to help the city with research, which we do. We're currently trying to save La Luce's restaurant at Lake and Ogden and Loomis. It's a former Schlitz Tide House, but it's a beautiful one with, copper, patinated copper bays and red brick, and you see it all the way down Ogden Avenue. And it was accidentally given a demolition permit because it was an orange rated building. It should have been held in a 90-day demo delay hold for review for possible designation. So we put together a little petition sheet, a very nicely worded one encouraging the city to landmark this. And within the first day, we got 1,000 signatures, and it's now been a week and we have 4,000 signatures.
Wow.
We were also very successful in getting a near north district of historic houses in and around Michigan Avenue and Superior and Wabash. And the community and the city and the Alderman Brendan Riley, all came together with a lot of people to landmark these 15 houses that are, that are just have a human scale, that, have small businesses in them, that have little restaurants that tourists find so charming as they walk off of Michigan Avenue. And it adds to so much of the Chicago mystique and the Chicago spirit. And we'd like to see more of these designated because, again, it also allows for sunlight and air to get to these high-rise buildings that are cropping up around these, former houses, which are now oftentimes, businesses, small businesses. But it's everything from, restaurants to little cafes, with their sidewalks and their gardens as, outdoor dining spots. And especially in COVID, that's important, right?
Yeah.
In our pandemic. So, but it really does add to the charm and scale. And it also tells a story as you walk down the street of what the neighborhood looked like, and even gives you a hint as to what North Michigan Avenue used to look like, a little bit more than a century ago. So it tells a visual story. And so all of this is really wonderful in our eyes. And, of course we have losses, and we all have losses, and we all have failures. But when we're able to save something for the better good of everybody, and it's long lasting, it's really rewarding. I have to share that with you. And so we encourage people to get involved, sign up for our free newsletter. We do everything pro bono for the most part. We occasionally run a bus tour where we charge for the lunch and the cost of the bus, but we even give that away a lot. So, and then every year we have our Chicago 7 Most Endangered list, and it's a play on Abby Hoffman and the Chicago 7 trial, as well as, the 7 architects that sort of pushed against the Miesian utilitarian style in the 70s. And this is our Chicago 7 Most Endangered Buildings. And we announce it every, it used to be March to align with Chicago's birthday or its anniversary of its incorporation, March 4th. But it's now moved back to February. So this coming year will be February 24th at the Chicago Architecture Center on Michigan and Wacker, really on Wacker Drive, East Wacker Drive. And we will name our 7 buildings, and it's a program, and we do an amazing brochure. This year's booklet is 100 pages, and we offer that with a lot of research. So a lot of our heart and soul goes into this, trying to make this a better city, Joseph.
Yeah. My next question was going to be if you have anything coming up, but you cleared it already in February.
Well, usually we have a lot of programs, and if people are interested in volunteering or donating, just go to our website, www.preservationchicago.org. Remember, .org.
.org, yes, not .com.
And somebody will respond to you. And of course, we're all working remotely. So you're in my home, you're in my historic dining room, on my great-grandparents' dining room table with artwork all around from them. and the rest of the house is rather modern looking, but welcome to my home. And then we are moving from our temporary space into a permanent space in the Williams Building by Halliburton Roche from 1899 at Wells and Monroe. And we've cleared away all the walls. So with the exception of a library, we're going to have a place where people can come in and look at books and do some research if they want to, an open desk. And it's really a fabulous little 10-story building from 1899 that when you're inside, when you're on the outside, you're like, this is a beautiful Chicago school building, big windows. When you're inside, you feel like you're in a Mies van der Rohe interior. It's all giant glass windows, 7.5 foot square, and they're all double windows. So it's really 14 and a half feet, almost 15 feet of linear feet of windows. And we have 7 banks of these. So it's really a panoramic right next to the L and in a building that people forget is even there. And it's a block from the Sears Tower, and it is right behind the Northern Trust, and all these wonderful landmark buildings that are sort of the calling card for the city of Chicago, some which we have saved, like the Hotel Gray by William LeBaron Jenney, father of the skyscraper, who introduced the steel frame idea where you'd hang the masonry off the building. And we were able to save this building and 2 others at the corner of LaSalle and Monroe, 1929 and 39 South LaSalle, all by William LeBaron Jenney. Where would you ever find that in the world? And the New York Life building that was known as 39 South LaSalle is now the Hotel Gray. And we saved that from many, many proposed developments that would have harmed the building or demolished it completely or built or sprung out of it. And it's now a beautiful, beautiful hotel for LaSalle Street, financial people. It's right in the heart of the financial district, where there used to be a ton of hotels when I was a kid, like the Sherman House and the LaSalle Hotel and the Midland. For the most part, all gone. So the New York Life building is one of those great hotels. And of course, we've seen a lot of great office buildings turned into first-class hotels, which is really wonderful because it's a reinvestment in these spaces, in these buildings. And oftentimes their lobbies are spectacular. Yep. And they make a really grandiose statement, as many of our Chicago historic hotels, from the Palmer House to the Drake and to the Blackstone and the Hilton, originally the Stevens Chicago Hilton, all have that same sort of spirit. And in a funny way, this is authentic Chicago, and it's a great way to repurpose these buildings. The Reliance building at State and Washington was another example of an early, if you will, glass skyscraper by Daniel Burnham and John Root and Charles Atwood that really broke the barriers on what you could do. But the New York Life building is really special that we were able to save at LaSalle and Monroe because it went up during the World's Fair of 1893, where 27 million people were in the city. So they started with the base of the building, which is granite, and then they ran out of granite, or it was delayed in shipping between floors 3 and 4. But then they had the terracotta and the brick. So they basically had this big gap, this 2-story gap, where you saw the base, and then you saw this terracotta and this brick almost hanging, suspended in the air by these little toothpick columns that were steel. So you could see the steel frame, and you could see how the ingenuity of sort of a bridge builder, William LeBaron Jenney being an engineer during the Civil War, using that sort of bridge technology, which is really fascinating. And then, you hung the masonry on these buildings versus building a giant building without any steel. And you see that in the Monadnock building by Burnham and Root, where the walls at the base are about 6 feet thick, but it doesn't have an exterior steel frame. Right. And this exterior frame, the steel frame, allowed for the windows to become bigger in an age before electricity and in an age before HVAC systems, when you needed ventilation. So these still are beautiful buildings with big windows, and it almost defies logic. And if you look at a building like the Carson Perry Scott store, was built as Schlesinger and Mayer's department store, now Sullivan Center on State and Madison. You can see the great master Louis Sullivan stretching all these materials, steel, terracotta, wrought iron, almost to its limits, where you feel like if you stretched it anymore, it would snap. So, these were the strides of the Chicago school. And of course, led to all sorts of great tall buildings. Many of the world's first tallest buildings were in Chicago, and there was a competition between New York and Chicago to build the tallest. So we still have examples of some of them, with the Manhattan building on South Dearborn at 16 stories, also the Monadnock, the Auditorium building, which is now Roosevelt University. But we also had the 22-story Masonic Temple at State and Randolph, which unfortunately was demolished, but it had a 22-story atrium. So could you imagine going between that atrium to Marshall Field, store by Daniel Burnham, and seeing that 13-story atrium, and then walking through Marshall Field and seeing a 7-story atrium with a Tiffany dome on top of it? I mean, to walk through these buildings on inclement days, which I used to do between the department stores once upon a time, which are now mostly schools and universities now, to walk through those spaces must have been really phenomenal. And so we want to protect these buildings for all time. And the development pressures have really gone beyond the loop to the neighborhoods now. So we find ourselves working to create landmark districts in neighborhoods and communities. And again, this is all a planning tool to preserve these things, and not to create a static museum piece, but to make these living landmarks that are used and viable. And it's really rewarding, but it's 24/7, and it's an emotional roller coaster, and it's lovely, and it's nail biting, and it's wrenching. And I tell my employees and people that work with us, hey, let's enjoy the experience. Let's have fun with this, because otherwise you'll pull out all your hair, because these things take a long time. Cook County Hospital, the old Main Post Office, we're a 20-year effort. From beginning, start to finish. And the Uptown Theater's been empty for 40 some years, and that's nowhere near even being started. So you can see these advocacy efforts are long-term. So we have about 170 buildings that we're currently involved in at some point, touching or really pushing hard or testifying for, or trying to find a new good steward to own and to purchase. So, and then we even try to protect our park spaces too from incursions by new developments. A very controversial Obama Presidential Center being inserted into a park space designed by Frederick Law Olmsted and belonging to the people for 130 years. How do you justify that? And most people think that, well, there's museums in all the parks. Well, guess what? Those museums were there before the parks, and the parks oftentimes grew around them. And that's certainly true with the museum campus, which was, if you look at early photographs of the Field Museum, it's surrounded by railroad tracks, believe it or not. There's the Illinois Central Railroad filling in land from the lake from the 1850s onward and making these railroad yards. And it was only through people like A. Montgomery Ward of the famous catalog company and department store that fought hard for our lakefront and to keep that open, free, and clear. And that's understood to be along the entire lakefront, but that's not really the case. You really see it mostly in downtown Chicago, and it's not defined. But we'd like to make the entire Chicago lakefront a national park, just like the town of Pullman, on the south side, the neighborhood of Pullman now, and just like the Indiana Dunes, to protect this lakefront and to help the city with maintenance. We have a number of smaller buildings that are falling apart, that don't have roofs, that are caving in on themselves, especially on the south side in Jackson Park. So we really want to be of great assistance. We want to be clever. We want to offer ideas. We want to be at the forefront of a lot of these discussions, but not necessarily lead them, but encourage a robust discussion to come out of, and robust ideas and cutting edge ideas out of all these things. So this is what we do, Joseph, and it's the most amazing and cool job, but it's not for everybody. Let me tell you. Oftentimes, we saved a historic house belonging to John Nuveen in the Irving Park neighborhood not long ago, and the Old Irving Park Association and the Historical Society were very much involved, and there were 3 ladies that were just fabulous, and after a year of a lot of testimonies and getting it through the Landmark Commission in all these various stages, from preliminary landmarks to final landmark designation to city council acceptance and all these committees, you end up testifying 5 to 6 times for just a regular building. And that's, and if there's public testimony, maybe more, or public hearing. And I remember at the final landmarks hearing, these 3 ladies were behind me. And when the final vote came through, tears were flying out of their eyes, and they were tears of joy, and they were laughing and crying at the same time. And I just turned around and looked at them and winked and gave them the thumbs up. And they were looking at me trying to dry their eyes, but the emotion, pent up emotion, and the passion, the effort, you put your heart and soul in these things was really evident. I took a couple pictures of them, and they wanted me to send them. And then they were sending me texts, even though the meeting went on, or join us for a martini across the street. We're celebrating. I'm like, I can't celebrate. I've got 3 more landmarks we got to testify for, but I'll see you around 5. And this was at 2, Yeah. So, they left me in their dust, but they're forever grateful. And, it's wonderful to be able to do that in tandem with, people that really care. And there are a lot of people that, are so focused on, working and getting food on their table, supporting their families, supporting their kids, making dinner, doing homework with them, that they can't get out to all these community meetings. So when it's appropriate, sometimes we represent that population that just can't get away, but through conversations or maybe a public meeting or a message or a phone call or a letter, we get their support, or a petition signature. So anyway, Joseph, this is what we do at Preservation Chicago. So please join us. And Joseph, we're expecting you to be a volunteer as well.
I literally came into this meeting thinking that I knew a good amount about Chicago and the history and the architecture, but I'm just mind blown at everything that goes into this, everything that your organization is doing, all the history behind it, the architecture behind it, the architects behind it. So this is extremely informative. Thank you so much. So we'll be sure to share all your social media and contact information when we post this. And typically for people to get engaged, they could donate, they could volunteer. Anything else on the list that you typically
join
see?
You know what? We have a newsletter. It's free. It's electronic. It's organized by and written and co-authored by Adam Natenshin, our director of operations, who's just a wonderful guy. Who was a board member for many years and then came on staff. And he writes that along with all of us contribute a little bit to this newsletter, but it's 40 to 60 pages every month. It's a month in review, so it comes out the week after the month is over, so we can really capture everything, even those last days. And Mary Lou Seidel is our director of community engagement. So and then we have Kathy Bond, our director of events, and Kathy and her family contribute in so many ways to our organization. I just want to say that she's just wonderful. And then there's the head troublemaker here, Executive Director Ward Miller. And I always field calls. I always pick up my phone. We talk to everybody. We talk to everybody who calls us, from the gal next door and the guy down the street to the news media, to politicians that ask us our thoughts, our opinions, or want to share a concern. We pick up and we talk to everybody, and that's, I think, a great source of pride that we're here. We try to be here for everybody, if you will.
Yeah. And the last thing that I wanted to end on is how we originally met. I don't know if you remember this, but probably 2 years ago, we were both in this Dunkin' Donuts, and there were 2 two little girls that were like slinging candy bars, and I'm like in a deep negotiation with them, explaining them like why I should get 2 for $5 versus 1 for $5, and you're just like sitting there like smiling, and I think like I had you take a picture too.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, and then we got to talking, and gave me your card, and that was, and 2 years later or whatever it was, here we are. So
that's
fun.
Great. I do remember that. It was downtown on Lake Street. And Joseph, the funny thing is I did take that picture and send it to you, and you did follow up, which is kind of amazing because it's been a long time. And you're also ratting me out that I was in a Dunkin' Donuts. But I think I was trying to get coffee to keep me going away, because we do community meetings way into the evening, even Zoom community meetings. So, even though our day may begin at, 9 in the morning or a little before or a little after, depending on what went on the night before, sometimes I don't get home until 10 or 10:30. You work dinner in there and you're going to bed at midnight, and it just starts all over again the next day. And nobody really understands when you've got a building under threat. And I get it completely. So that's why we're always there. Now, you might want to talk to my wife and children about this. My children are now adults. So a shout out to Hayden and Catlin Miller, who are both in the arts too. So I guess the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. But Joseph, that was a wonderful meeting, and it was worth going into that Dunkin' Donuts to meet you and to be part of this podcast 2 years later. That's a crazy, cool Chicago story, and it's very much the way a lot of our interactions are in Chicago. And I like to think of Chicago as America's biggest small town, because it really is.
This is great. I'm excited to get this story out there. And like I said, we'll make sure to post all this information and hopefully drive some people to the newsletter. That's how I stayed in touch over the past 2 years and stayed connected. Yes. So
it goes on forever and ever and ever.
It's a big newsletter. So folks that sign up, be ready, month. But a lot of good content.
Thank God it's electronic, because if it were printed, it'd be like a 5-pound document every month, right? So. Right.
Awesome.
Hey, but Joseph, it was wonderful talking with you, and enjoyed spending a little time with you and your followers, and I really look forward to seeing what your edited podcast looks like at the end of the day, and how much of me ends up on the cutting room floor.
No. We typically post everything. So this is good. This will be really informative, because I didn't know about this. I'm from Chicago. I've lived here my whole life. So people that haven't lived in Chicago their whole life, I'm sure this will be really informative as well.
And again, we welcome everybody to get involved.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you know of a great organization or individual leaving a positive impact, we'd love to tell their story. Check us out and contact us at gtzp.org, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or YouTube. And also to rewatch our other episodes and see what other great stories are being shared. Thanks again.